Hey, I get it. Over the last few years, blurred and virtual backgrounds when you're doing all those webcam meetings have become the absolute norm. But if you're using these tools, you are absolutely doing yourself a disservice by creating an unnecessary visual distraction. But more importantly, you are missing out on a huge opportunity to create an emotional connection with your audience. Today, I'm going to tell you why. So, welcome to another episode of Sales Lab Live. I'm David Premer, and I don't want to say this is going to be a bit of an open and shut case today. This is not going to be like a long, protracted training session, but I do want to give you some insight and some context into why I believe this idea of using these blurred virtual backgrounds in your webcam, Zooms, Microsoft Teams, whatever, your customer interactions, is actually hurting you. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were a little bit uncomfortable bringing people into their homes, we were trying to do our best to set up shop in our, in our bedrooms, in our bathrooms, wherever we could find, and I know a lot of people live in very small spaces, apartments, they share space. I totally get it. And so this idea of kind of like, hey, you know what? Let's just put the focus on us. Let's blur the background, forget about it, became kind of the norm. But what actually happened is, and there's a scientific principle behind this, whenever you are on camera and you are intentionally obscuring something, what it does is it creates a couple of things. Number one, it creates this unnecessary visual distraction. And I've talked about this if I kind of go into, not to unnecessarily go into a little bit of unnecessary slidage here, but it creates this unnecessary, visual distraction. And I want to introduce you to a fellow by the name of John. Now, John was gracious enough to share some pictures with me. And John, if you're watching this, thank you. You might be watching this on the recording, all good. And, he was telling me a story about how he was trying his best, even now, to set up his virtual presence. And he doesn't have a lot of space where he lives. So he said, look, I had to set up in a walk-in closet, right? And so what he did was he put a bunch of kind of green sheets up in his closet. And this is what, he sent me this picture. And again, thank you, John, for letting me use this. This is kind of what he's sitting in front of. And obviously, he's saying, hey, look, I don't want to have to sit in front of this thing. So I decided to put up a green screen, and that lets me have a little bit of flexibility with what I put in the background. But, I want to show you, and this applies equally to you. I'm going to show you a bunch of options of what John has been using. And I'll just kind of point this out that, for example, he works for a company called Applied Engineering Technology. So he says, hey, I have these options where, for example, sometimes I use like just the logo in the background. Sometimes I have this, kind of nice fake, coffee shop or a brick wall. Sometimes I kind of have this window. Sometimes I have this, conference room. And you might be looking at this and you might be saying, hey, look, what's the harm in this, right? The guy's got a virtual background, nothing wrong. And by the way, I'm not saying that mastering this is going to all of a sudden catapult you to millions of dollars of sales. However, you can tell, right? When you look at a picture like this, you can tell that something doesn't match up, especially for people, like me with curlier hair. You can tell there's like some anti-aliasing in some areas where the camera isn't able to kind of keep up around the border of his body, around the border of his shoulders. And when you look at this, like something just looks a little off, right? It's not like 100%, oh my gosh, like when you're looking at something like this, which by the way, I think is 100% way too busy. I'm really sorry to say, John, super busy and super crazy distracting. However, I can see that this is kind of like a little fake. I can see that there's something going on here. And the same thing happens, I would submit to you, is if you're using a blurred background, it's the same thing. Now, John is limited. And hey, look, I'm not here to tell you that like there's no case to be made for blurred and virtual backgrounds. Because if the only space John has to work with is that walk-in closet with clothes behind him, okay, I get it. We got to do something with that, right? But for most of us, usually we're like at our kitchen table or we're in like our bedroom or someplace where there's nothing like terribly offensive. There's nothing, like there's not like dirty laundry and like wet things hanging off hangers in the scene behind us. We're just kind of in our normal, habitat. And so number one, no need to create this unnecessary virtual distraction, this visual distraction, because what happens is whenever I see something that doesn't look right, and by the way, this is something that for many of us is subconscious. Whenever I see something that doesn't look 100% right, it's like a magnet to my eye. My eye is unnecessarily drawn to it. And what's happening, of course, is it's taking the focus off whatever it is you're talking about, which is 100% opposite of what you want to do. So to the extent you can minimize visual distractions, you are going to be in good shape. Now, lately, I have seen a bunch of people using these kind of virtual backgrounds in a much more simplistic way. And I'm actually much cooler with this kind of implementation if you need to. Now, I'm going to show you. John didn't send this to me. John, I created this for you, my friend. So, and if you're out there watching, I'm happy to send this to you. But I think, if you're just going to do something really simple, like a white background, and I would even submit to you, you could be sitting in front of a white wall. If you have just a plain white wall, that's good too, right? It's simple, it's authentic, there's no visual distraction. But if you have to use a virtual background, something simple like this, I'm kind of okay with, right? So what you don't want to do is create anything that's going to kind of draw your eye unnecessarily to something that you think is or the viewer thinks you're hiding, right? Whenever I see someone with a blurred background, and I will tell you, I see tons of people with blurred backgrounds that are blurred unnecessarily, meaning I'm sitting in front of something, maybe there's a picture in the background, maybe there's a window, and I kind of, these are, my clients or prospects or friends I'm talking to on these, Zoom sessions and so on. I say, like, well, what's behind you there? And they just kind of unblur it. I'm like, there's a picture on the wall and a window. There's no reason why that needs to be blurred. I'm here to tell you, like, it's okay to showcase what you have around you. And by the way, there's lots of like little party tricks you can do. You're seeing me here, of course, in my home office setup. And in the past, I've done a complete video. People always ask me, how do you get this camera? How do you do this camera tricks? I have a whole video, another Sales Lab live session on that. I will do my best to link it somewhere in the comments and descriptions and the cards here so you can check it out. But, the idea is that when people see you in your natural surroundings, it creates a conversation, right? It's an opportunity to create that dialogue. And, oftentimes when I see people in these kind of, virtual settings, they are blurring things unnecessarily. Like, you don't have to blur. There's nothing sensitive. There's nothing weird. And if you're trying to figure out, okay, but you know what, David? I don't need someone to see all my laundry and all that kind of stuff behind me. This shot that you see here of me, if you were to pan, a little bit outside of this frame, you would see the chaos. Like, for example, sometimes people don't realize I have a whole bunch of crap here on the floor behind me, kind of leaned up against the wall. I have a lot of artwork that my kids have made me over the years that I like to kind of have, but I kind of keep it out of the way. And, it's okay if you see like a little bit over my shoulder, but you can, in many instances, bring people into your home, wherever it is you're working, wherever it is you're kind of shooting from, and kind of just push everything to the side and keep it very, very simple. So when in doubt, unblur, let them see what's going on, because you don't want to create that unnecessary visual distraction. But I would also say, and this is the bigger thing, that if you are using one of these blurred or virtual backgrounds, you're missing on a huge opportunity to create a personal connection. And I'll tell you, like, I see people all the time with really interesting things going on behind them. Sometimes it's like a picture. Sometimes, it's a picture from a trip. Sometimes there's a musical instrument on the floor behind them. Sometimes it's, their graduation diploma, right? Sometimes it's the stuff on their bookshelf. And for whatever reason, I always look at people's bookshelves. I'm curious, like what books they have. And so what it actually does is that actually does not create a visual distraction. On the contrary, it sparks a conversation. And I can't tell you how many examples of calls I've seen. I do a lot of call coaching with my clients, and I've been watching like call recordings that have been done over video. And it's interesting to see you have, sellers that have, for example, a guitar just kind of laying on the floor on the wall behind them. They like to play guitar. And the client, the prospect, they also like guitar. And it creates this amazing conversation. Literally, probably an hour ago, I was talking to a prospective client, and if you're out there watching this, God bless you. I was talking to a prospective client, and he was sitting in front of he was CEO of his company, sitting in front of mostly a white wall in his office. There was a phone, and he had a few packs of Twizzler candy on the desk behind him. And it wasn't like propped up so you could see the logo. It was just kind of there. I'm like, oh, hey, like, what's up with the Twizzlers there? And he's like, oh, so he was, kind of in that space, marketing, advertising. And he says, they're actually a client of ours. And he was kind of telling me the story. And that sparks a conversation. And this was the first time he and I met, right? And so if you're looking for these kind of interesting visual cues as a seller, it's going to give you a tremendous opportunity to spark up a conversation about something that your customer or prospect legitimately cares about because it's in the room with them, right? So there's nothing wrong. People ask me all the time what this poster is. I actually have a video about what this poster is on my YouTube channel. People ask, like, what's that poster? Is that your whiteboard? What is it? It's actually a signed flip chart from Simon Sinek, something he did on stage at a conference I was at years ago. I met him. They gave me the flip chart. I had him sign it. It's very meaningful to me, but people ask me about that all the time, right? And it's a great conversation starter. So you are missing, if you are blurring, if you are using a virtual background, you're missing a huge opportunity, even if it's a little pack of Twizzlers on the desk. And by the way, I've seen this go in the complete opposite direction. I've seen call recordings with sales reps holding babies, right? Hey, look, I'm home alone. My wife is taking a nap. I'm just trying to calm the baby down. Is it okay if I just hold my kid here while we kind of talk about the solution that we can? What is more humanizing than that, right? So I say there's nothing wrong about letting people into your home. And now look, if you have some kind of security concern, some legit privacy concern, you have your kids playing in the background, and I understand you don't want to have your kids on camera. Like, I get all that, right? So there are legit reasons why you might need to obscure what's going on, but there are ways of doing that you can do such that you're not creating that, intense emotional distraction, but also ways that you can do it in such that it's simple, but you're also creating that emotional connection with your customer. So even just that little bit of visual interest can not only create that connection, but it humanizes you as well. And I actually think that was one of the best things to come out of the pandemic, this idea that everyone saw each other in our kind of, natural habitat. I'm wearing my best t-shirt life. I'm living my best t-shirt life every single day. This has almost become my uniform. I don't wear sports coats anymore. I don't wear button downs. Like, this is what people come to know me as. And for a lot of people, it's very comforting. It's very humanizing. And so I feel it's the same thing when you're at home, wherever you are, dialing in from. Let people see you, right? We spend so much time and energy, especially, with social media and so on, kind of project an image of what we want to be to other people. I say, hey, look, there's nothing wrong about letting people see you in your own natural habitat. So, baby steps here. If you're using a blurred background, ask yourself, is there something really in my background that I should be blurring because there's some kind of big security or privacy concern that they cannot see? Or, same thing with virtual backgrounds, or am I missing a huge opportunity to create that emotional connection with my buyer, with my customers, with my prospects? So that is all I have for you today on this episode of Sales Lab Live. That is my case for why you should ditch the blurred and virtual backgrounds. The simplest thing to do. Hopefully, we're all going to be getting back in person with our customers and prospects and friends as much as possible. But the reality is, I believe this virtual life for many of us is going to be here to stay for at least a long time. So get used to it, but use it to your advantage to create that important connection with your customers. I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Sales Lab Live.